without further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to Johan. Kerry's already introduced you, Johan, so I won't do that again. I'll leave you to take it from here.
Thank you so very much. It's a great privilege. I would like to thank Kerry and her team for this wonderful opportunity, and also a shout out to the team of Business Process Enablement South Africa, Andy, Tracy, Neville, and others for facilitating this great opportunity. I'm going to share a slide deck with the shiny new feature in Zoom that I don't know if you know about this, but you can actually transpose yourself over the slides. I just wanted to make sure let me just bring up the first slide. There we go. Can anyone just let me know that you can actually see this? I want to just make sure.
Yeah, that's good, Johan.
Okay, super. So my name is Johan Steyn. I live here in Johannesburg in South Africa. I have been in consulting for many years, and over the last few years, my attention changed to artificial intelligence and smart technologies. I've done some work in robotic process automation, which is kind of already old technology, because these days we talk a lot about smart or intelligent automation, where we utilize machine learning models and predictive analytics, and also almost get to a point of autonomous automation. But I'm also very passionate about the future of my own child and of our children. So I want to kind of bring a lens of where I think this technology is going, but not just from a technology point of view, because I'm not really a techie. I studied psychology and sociology, so sometimes I think, what do I know? But how do we make sure that we automate responsibly? So the topic of my talk is technological apartheid. Are we creating a world of segregation and minority rule? Obviously, the word apartheid carries a lot of weight. It brings up a lot of emotions, especially for those of us who live in South Africa, who grew up in that world. And I don't want to over dramatize it, and I don't want to obviously be political about it, but I want to touch on what apartheid was and how it relates, in my view, to the kind of world we are most likely creating. And to really, through my slides and the 20 short minutes that I have, to kind of just set the scene for the event today, because we still, for now, I believe, have the power in our hands to make sure we steer this technology in the right direction. But if we're not smart, and if we're not working together, and I'm an optimist, I'm not a pessimist, I don't believe all the conspiracy theories. I do believe fundamentally that this technology can make our world better if you think of healthcare and education, all those topics. But we should also not be caught sleeping at the wheel. Because if we are not smart and if we're not working together, and I'm not talking about the 30 years that's remaining, I'm talking about the next few short years, we can really lose control of this technology, and it can cause a global upheaval in a way that we've never seen before. So I grew up in apartheid South Africa. I'm white, so obviously I grew up on the good side of it. And it's only as a teenager where I started becoming friends with people in the rural areas, people of other colors, and this is way before the end of apartheid, where I realized what kind of world most of the people in our country are living in. So think of this, and this is not just true of South Africa, it's true of many places in the world, even today, that just because of the area that you were born in, or the color of your skin, just because of that, you don't have access to the same services, to the same quality of life, to the same kind of education. It's not your fault. And that's what we're doing with this technology, and hence the reason for me doing this talk. And it's not obviously necessarily a race thing, although we still see a lot of racial bias in the likes of facial recognition, especially in the US and in other areas of the world. But if you don't have the opportunity to be educated, especially in this kind of technology, then you might be left behind. And we are most likely going to create this technological apartheid, where irrespective of the family you're born in, irrespective even the kind of education you're having, if you are not a part of the haves, but you're part of the have-nots when it comes to exposure and training in this kind of technology, you really will be left behind. Very briefly on a personal note, about 7 years ago, my ex-wife and I adopted a little boy. He was a year and a half old. His name is Aiden. He's now a 7-year-old monster doing karate and all that, but I loved seeing him grow up. Why this is real for me, even though I grew up on the good side of apartheid, I often think that my son would 30 years ago or before would not be able to live in the house with me. He would not be able to have a good education. he would not be able to join me to go to a restaurant because it was whites only. So it's really close to him. And I often, when I look at him, and he's, I mean, he, even though he's adopted, he is my heart and my soul, as I think many adopted parents would say about their adopted children. But it's really a big issue for me to think if he was born at the wrong time, and maybe if we haven't met, because there are more than 5 million orphans in South Africa who will most likely never find a good home, then what kind of future would he have had? So my motivation of doing these kind of talks, and even though I work in tech and consulting, I often think about him, and this very picture I have on my wall in my study, and that's my motivation. What world am I creating for him? What world will I leave for him? And that's where smart automation and the kind of technological advance that we see at the moment comes in and is really relevant, because I might mess it up for him. He might be on the wrong side of this technological apartheid. So a little bit about the digital divide and about bias. So this is a picture of most likely 80% of places on Earth, but this is an area called Alexandra here in Johannesburg. And earlier this week, I was on a webinar, and we were 4 people on the webinar. We were all, in consulting, fairly good incomes, fairly good education, and we were talking about the future of our children in South Africa. And sometimes I think, what the heck do we know? And in fact, one of the panelists said that, we all have cell phones now, and we all have good internet, and even if you're poor, you have no excuse to upskill yourself. And I said to him, have you ever been in the townships? Not drive past it, not go to the Apartheid Museum, which is in a fairly nice area in Johannesburg. Have you actually been in some of these shacks? Have you seen? And he said no. And I was so tempted to tell him, then keep your mouth shut. Because if you're living in a shack with 10 other people, and if you don't necessarily have a smartphone, which is the case for most people in the world, if you most likely don't have a good internet access, then how can you upskill yourself? And I just wanted to kind of set the scene about these biases, because almost everyone, I can bet, of us on this event today are in a good income bracket. We're living fairly good lives. So we talk on this almost like throne about changing the world and changing the world for poor people and all that. But I just always want us to make sure that we can try and put ourselves in the shoes of the people we are talking about. Because otherwise, how will we really know what kind of issues they're facing? Here in Johannesburg, or in Sandton, Alexandra is across the road. On the other side of the road is Sandton, which is the richest square mile in Africa. And a lot of people who work in Sandton, especially cleaners and security guards, come from that area. And it's, sometimes if you look at pictures from like satellite pictures, this massive divide. And even though many things have changed in our country, there's still this great divide between the haves and the have-nots. So can we use technology? If I think of my own country, if I think of Africa, if I think of other areas in the world, to educate people better, to give better healthcare to people, especially poor people and in rural areas. If you think of this whole rollout of vaccines, the role that automation and smart automation can play. Recently, I was standing in line for a vaccine, and it was a mess. Now, I don't know if that's just a problem in our country, but this basic process automation about getting the vaccines and distributing it to save the lives of people in our country and most likely our economy is a mess. So it's not something that we can speak about as technologists just, or it's something that is a luxury to speak about. This is a life important and critical issue for the future of our world, to speak about these things and to make a good impact. I want to touch briefly on 3 books, and I'm sure these slides could be available after the meeting. Prof. Tsalisi Mawala wrote a book that he published last year called Closing the Gap. He's the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. He's also on the Presidential Commission for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I'm not going to read my screen. You can. I don't like it when people read their presentations. But in this book, he speaks a lot about the realities of people in South Africa. It was even a further eye-opener for me. He speaks a lot about Africa, and he speaks about this digital divide, which is a big theme of all his books. And I encourage you to get this book if you can. But come back to that bias conversation. When it comes to the lives that other people live, most people on our planet, we can almost not imagine it. We talk about tools and frameworks and all this technological stuff. But I mean, if you don't even have electricity, if you don't have connectivity, if you barely have food to eat, how will you uplift yourself? You're most likely a 5th, 6th, 7th generation poor person. You were born with no chance. And we who have, and we who know, and we who are connected have a moral imperative to do something. And I'm not saying become Mother Teresa or join the Red Cross. We all have jobs and we need to pay our own bills, and when charity starts at home and all that. But read books like this because it'll help you change your mindset when it comes to this technology. Next book that was published fairly recently by Dr. Jacques Ludic here in Cape Town. Amazing work, quite a thick book, 520 pages, about how artificial intelligence can benefit everyone. And he talks often in the book and in the public talks that I've heard from him about his massive transformative purpose, using smart automation, using artificial intelligence to benefit not just a small few, not just the rich, but everyone. Which brings me to maybe one of the most important books that I've read, and I would assume many of you as well, which is from Yuval Noah Harari. All his books are amazing, but in this book, he talks about creating the so-called useless class. And what he says is through genetic or re-engineering, through longevity that this technology can give us, through amazing wealth, we will most likely create even a greater divide between the few that have great wealth and that will most likely live much longer than people live now, and the masses of people out there who we can't upskill, which is one of the big differences between the previous three so-called industrial revolutions and this one that we're living in now. In the previous three, the net job gains toward the end of the cycle of that transition was a lot more. It was positive, even though there was a lot of disruption and a lot of fighting against it and pushback. But eventually, a lot more people had jobs. This is the first industrial revolution where we will not be able to upskill people. We will always need bricklayers and plumbers and people like that, but especially knowledge workers. Whether you're a chartered accountant or a consultant or whatever you do, there's a good chance that our jobs will be displaced. So imagine you, even though you're very educated, you're very experienced, but robotics or some sort of intelligent automation took your job away. And there's pretty much nothing else for you to do. And again, I'm positive and rather than pessimistic about this. But imagine a world where most of the people cannot reskill themselves, cannot uplift themselves. So it's important to look at the ethical side of these things, at the philosophy, at the psychology, and not just at the technology and the platforms. The sphere of irrelevance. Now, I work in predominantly the big banks here locally, world-class banking system. And whenever we speak about this technology, robotic process automation, autonomous automation, massive pushback from people, which is human nature. Technology, I don't think will ever change our nature. We are tribal, we are selfish. It's rather me and my family than you and your family. So when it comes to even just the sniff of I might lose my job, always massive pushback. And this fear of irrelevance and this fear of not ever being able to have a job ever again. Many other things, that's a massive can of worms. If we think of privacy, if we think of facial recognition, if you haven't seen Coded Bias yet, that's a documentary film on Netflix, I encourage you to do it. My face is my personal data. If you think of GDPR, or if you think here in South Africa, we've got POPIA. If I walk on the street, now in the UK, for instance, I read that there's one camera for every 14 people. But if I walk in the street and a camera is following me or identifying my face, I did not give permission that my personal facial data could be harvested and shared. In China already, there are some cities where you cannot buy food. You cannot access public transport unless you submit yourself to facial recognition. Brings me back to George Orwell, 1984, and a favorite book of many of us, I believe. Think of this. Say I go to a supermarket to buy food for myself and for my family, but unless I submit to facial recognition, I will not be able to buy the food. I will not be able to withdraw money from my bank. I will not be able to go anywhere. And then we've heard, especially in the US, a lot of the false arrests because this kind of technology struggles to identify female faces and identify darker skinned faces. This is serious stuff, and we should be very, very serious about that. But I basically want to leave you with, after sharing all that stuff, with a positive view and a rallying call, really, to say that the future is in our hands for now. Irrespective of whatever you think your level of influence is, you might be a CEO of a company, you might work for Microsoft or Google or whatever, or you might do something that you feel is much less significant. We all have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to ensure that our children is trained in this technology, even though a lot of school curricula, secondary, tertiary in particular, don't facilitate this in the way that they should. Think of the people who work around you who might lose their jobs. This balancing act that was my first slide, I think is something that a lot of corporate leaders and societal leaders are struggling with. We have to become more competitive. It's about shareholder return and value. And the more we automate and bring down our back office costs, the more we automate and use machine learning and pattern recognition to better serve our clients, the better. On the other hand, it's inevitable that people will lose their jobs. We talk about upskilling people as if it's an easy thing. It's a very, very difficult thing. I don't have the answers, and I don't know if anyone has. But as long as we grapple with this, as long as we keep on talking, as long as we keep sharing ideas, and as long as this keeps us up at night, because it is an extremely serious issue that we should take very seriously, but also we have the power in our hands to influence it to some way or another. And with that, I say, I hope it was beneficial and helpful. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Johan, thank you so much. That's really thought-provoking and valuable, I guess, to set the scene. You know, this is a technology, as Kerry said at the start, that there's no holding it back. And those of us in the industry, of course, have a job to ensure that the deployment and use of automation is done in a way that delivers maximum business benefit. But also, you know, as automation, as we've predicted for many years, changes the world, to some degree, it's our job to prepare the world for that change. So thank you for highlighting that, Johan.